Welcome back, intrepid travellers of infinite dimensions. If I've still got any of your attention, I'm aware that things might be a little complicated at the moment, but I'm going to try and bring them down a bit after correcting a truly atrocious mistake. I mean, come on. 1D cold singularity, 0D cold singularity. So let me just hot in this system, 1D hot annihilation. So let's just, it just like it jumped out at me the moment I saw the board. And I think that's all we need on the technical stuff at the moment, as I said, because as far as it looks, the theory is so nice and kind of complete in the sense that anything can ever be complete in an incomplete system. But what's nice is there's some kind of reflection about this whole construction up from this kind of infinite dimensional 0D space right up to the top. So the kind of 0D, and that exemplifies the feminine principle, which I realise I hadn't really mentioned very much, because the unifying feature of this is that we're going to start with closed loops and then generate everything else from that. The works right the way up from the bottom. Well, actually, we're starting off from a single point singularity. And then that's where the entanglement starts from, basically, because there is only 0D. So anything that happens there, the first evolution just can only be zero-dimensional entanglement. That's all we've got. And then that infinite flow starts to flow out into the finite dimensionals once it resolves itself into some kind of equilibrium situation. But as I said, I don't really want to talk about the technical stuff. I want to leave that till a little later. And I really wanted to get onto a little bit of storytelling, because I think that's going to bring it right down to earth, because a lot of these things are really difficult to think about unless you get a story that kind of in some way shows how these things can relate to everyday life, rather than us insane multi-dimensional travellers who are quite used to travelling in infinite dimensional spaces. So it's kind of, we've been trained to do this, so that, you know, I did my whole PhD on this kind of stuff with Noel, who basically taught me the ropes, and if it wasn't for Noel, I wouldn't know about the Beltrami equation at all. So it's like, he showed me it. I found it horrendously difficult to use. It took me, as I said, 18 months to get anything past Noel at all. And basically, sorry, I meant to turn it off that way because I wanted to take things down to darkness, so you just set the setting, because this is going to be a fairly ghostly story and not necessarily for kids. Even though the story is somewhat childish, the message isn't. But it can, you know, kids do love scary stories. But this is one about life, death, and very importantly, the anti-material principle. Now, in the the Rig Vedas and all of those Bhagavad Gita and the ancient texts, they have been saying, and the people who study that and the yogis have been saying for a long time, that the West has only found unsubtle matter, like unsubtle antimatter. What they call antimatter is the spirit, the connection. So it's a holistic system. It's exactly the system I'm describing, really, where the vacuum energy is the antiparticle, because we don't have any freedom in choosing the antiparticle, because we've only got one parameter. That's the important thing. Normally you'd imagine you'd have a bit of choice in choosing what the antiparticle is. But here, because we've girdalized the system. Anyway, let me talk about that later, because I know this is meant to be a ghost story of types. So, but we are talking about ghostly systems. I mean, spirits and things living in their own ghost, and that being the form of the connection. So there is a fundamental ghostliness to this that's tangible. not intangible. And there's some very interesting experiments. But anyway, let's you know, I've turned the cut. I think I should be off really, because this is really about Alice, and she had a problem because her rabbit had her pet rabbit had run away from her and had dived into this rabbit hole, and it was like dropping under the force of quantum gravity. I mean, as we all know, quantum gravity is a little bit of a nightmarish rabbit hole. So Alice, and this was seemingly like Alice is normally just a letter A and Bob, but here Alice is like turned into Alice, and like what? Something strange is going on here. Anyway, there's a lot more that I've sketched out for this as a story, but I just want to cut to the mid-scene because this jumped out at me when the Dall-e came up with this image that seemed, well, it instantly resonated with me because it has a story to it. So I will flesh this story out, I promise, but I'm going to give a little spoiler. And the spoiler is this. As soon as the effects kicked in, she felt time slow down. Every cell in her body seemed to stop moving. Her hair seemed frozen in time, and it actually seemed like her hair was weaving the whole forest that she saw around her. But as it was doing so, she also saw that the forest was just a circle. She couldn't understand it. I was standing in this forest and now I'm in this circle, and now time is stopping. And then suddenly, mid-step, she's completely frozen. Not a thought. Nothing. And suddenly, maybe there was some kind of like, who knows what, but suddenly this kind of mysterious voice came into her head, and she saw a vision, and it said, what is going to happen next, dear Alice, is so complicated that we have to start from the east at very high frequencies, very, very hot, and make a transport to read all of your hidden positions that you can't calculate you don't have the power to calculate what's going to go on next. And there are no computers that you've got that can do it either. So in order to work out what's going to happen next step, we have to somehow get a transcendental equation to this very, very difficult problem that works out where all the heat is flowing. And there's no computational capacity even in a universe to do that. She didn't know where this voice was coming from. What do you mean no computational capacity in this universe? That's not, why have I got this voice? Time stopped, but yet I can see my hair completely, like my body's frozen. And she was like looking at her body, and every hair was like, everything around it, this baroque strange wheel, was her hair. And her hair was everything, and time had stopped, and it was like directly above her, and there was something below her, and then she was kind of floating in space. And then the voice said, yes, don't worry, but it's very hot. You can feel that heat on your left. And that you'll feel that heat come through. Don't worry about it, dear, because we're going to the west where it's cooler, because the heat will come in very hot, but before we can actually get it down to you, it will burn you up if it's too close to you. So we have to cool it down before we can actually work out where you're going to go next. So the energy goes over to the west where it becomes cool in the earth. And then, of course, it has to be pushed through to Alice's past, because we have to work out, it has to catch up with her present, but at the moment it's on the west, which is a completely different space, so we have to take it through to a different dimension now, Alice, which is the south. And once it's in the south, we can take the energy up and work out where you're going to be in the future. But meanwhile, time will still stop, but don't worry, it will start soon, again, soon enough. And then, but then of course the energy is in the future, and not at the center where all the connections start from. Because if you want to connect a grid, you have to have a central point, and that central point is at infinity. So we have to get it from the north to infinity, and of course the most natural path to do that is round the clock face again to 3, so it's in the east again, and then send the information about now where everything is, and the updated heat map has to go to the center again, so that the whole cycle can start again. And so basically that's the little detail of the story that I now can kind of pass on through so that we can get to the next levels. But as far as I'm concerned, this shows exactly how things are quantized, and almost the only way you can do it if the universe that you're trying to simulate is extremely complicated. And I think with that, other than there's some very interesting stuff about SU4, and this is really for the mathematicians, so you know, the little bit of storytelling is over now. There's a much more complicated story coming, which of this is a little bit of a scene, but I'm trying to put it together at the moment, and as you can imagine, it all takes a little bit of time, and I'm working through a bit of a backlog at the moment. So I hope you've all enjoyed this, and you know, as I say, smash that like button, and I really appreciate if you've put up with all these little mistakes and visualizations and things like that, and certainly I've very much enjoyed it, and I hope you all have too. So thank you very much, and we'll just leave it there with Alice being frozen in time. Thank you very much. Goodbye.